Hi there, it's Cheryl Durst, CEO of IIDA. And as a continuation of our Big Picture series, I'm really honored today to be joined by Martha Thorne, an incredibly insightful woman who is just a fave friend of mine. It's been great getting to know Martha over the years. But what you need to know about Martha is she's the dean of the IE School of Architecture and Design. It's one of 5 schools at an innovative private university in Madrid. In terms of research, her interests reside in the dynamics of cities and the interrelation of the built, natural, and digital environments. There are so many fascinating things about Martha and her time in Chicago and her time in Spain, and I'm excited to start this conversation with her. Hi, Martha, how are you?
Oh, Cheryl, it's so nice to see you. And I have such memories of our last meal together with other women. And every time I go back to the restaurant, they ask me about that group of women because they saw that we were so passionate in our conversations and we just had a great time. So I'm looking forward to the next time that we can be physically together. And it's
Same.
great to be digitally together
Yeah,
today.
yeah. That was Martha, that experience for the audience. Martha invited me to participate in an international conference on affordable housing. And she led a panel of just extraordinary thinkers around what does affordable housing mean? What does it mean globally? Clearly, we know that it is a problem in the US, but it is a worldwide problem. And I had the pleasure and honor of joining a group of amazing women from around the world. And I think all of us know that experience of sitting on a panel and then you end up forging friendships with people. And we had an incredible dinner in Madrid. What's to hate about that? But good food and great conversation. And let's tie that right in, Martha, to the work that you're doing now. Right, affordable housing is a struggle. It's a challenge. It's an issue that doesn't require just doing, but critical strategic thinking. Let's talk a little bit about what critical thinking means to you in the context of design and architecture, and the program that you're leading there in Spain. How about if we start off with that?
Right. No, that's great. Critical thinking, of course, I think it's useful in everything we do in our personal lives. And in education, I think it's especially important because it helps us see the impact of what we do short, medium, and long term. And critical thinking, this process of self-evaluation or evaluation of the challenges that we have, the client projects, I think it's also really good because it's a way to encourage clients to think more broadly, to think outside the box. And Cheryl, you and I know that designers solve multiple problems at the same time. We work on different levels at the same time. And I think this is something that clients don't always appreciate. But if we use this critical thinking and sort of say, but what if we did this? Or instead of this, what would be the implications of doing that? Or this seems to add much more value, even though it costs a little bit more. How do you feel about that? Those questions, I think, are really important. And I'm smiling because I always say, engineers say 2 plus 2 is 4, and designers say why. And I think why is the critical thinking, the component that sets architects and designers apart and really makes them agents of change and new ideas.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Martha. Every great project begins with why. Process begins with why. Relationships with clients begin with why. And it's, what's the role of design education in preparing design students for the challenge of why, and also for meeting the challenges of the future?
Design education, on one hand, because it's often project-based learning, it's where the why is very, very comfortable to probe. You're not looking for a set answer, multiple choice questions on an exam, but it's an exploratory process. So there, the why is embedded in that. And it also, the design process of evaluating steps along the way and having peer reviews, review by faculty members. Those are things that encourage students and faculty, but encourage students to be able to defend their ideas and have deeper understanding of what they're putting forward. It's not just an answer, but it's an explanation.
Yeah.
So in design education, that why question, I think, comes from the pedagogy. And then later we can talk more about how design education can impact other disciplines, because we know what we do, and wouldn't it be great if other disciplines appreciated what we do?
Let's go there right now.
Okay.
How do we instigate that impact and that understanding? I feel that designers, particularly interior designers, not only are they lifelong learners, they are lifelong educators, right?
Yes.
They are constantly educating others about what they do, how they do it, and why they do it. Let's talk about that impact and how we can increase that impact of understanding what design is and what it does.
I think there's a lot of ways to do it, and it can be very formal ways, such as at IE, at the School of Architecture and Design. We have a dual degree of design along with business. We have another dual degree that we're starting on urban studies with economics. So there are formal ways of doing it, but then there are informal or less formal ways of doing it. And I would say when design students take electives related to other disciplines, then that's a great opportunity for them to explain how they see an issue and how they approach it. I also think as a school, or as educators, as an organization such as IIDA, we should craft courses, short programs on design for people in other fields. I'm in Vienna right now, and I was participating in a tourism conference. And so people in the hospitality industry, they call it hospitality, and it goes from physical to experience to city making, and to talk to them about the power of design and the value that this holistic thinking brings is a great opportunity. So I think we have to pull out our megaphone every opportunity we get, because unfortunately many people, because they don't really understand the nature of design, they try to define it in a very siloed way, in a very narrow way. I mean, it's normal, but I think that's where we have a great opportunity. And as you mentioned, lifelong learning for designers and for non-designers.
Yeah. I love that idea, Martha, that you posited about crash courses in design for non-designers. I'm kind of picturing a group of future CPAs and MBAs, those folks who are future CFOs, and doing a design 101. Those are the people who will be managing the budgets of the CEOs, the C-suite officers who are working with designers, bringing design into their organizations, but it has to be signed off on by the folks who are in control of the money, who manage the money. And I love that idea of taking other professions and offering them a crash course introduction to the value of design.
Absolutely. I think the important thing there, Cheryl, is to remind students they're not going to be a designer after one course. You and I know in design, interior design especially, is really a big commitment on the part of students. It's not quick. And every day it's getting more and more complex as we look at new materials, concepts of well-being. diversity, responsiveness. So it's not easy, but I think if we remember that CEOs, they're the ones that have to understand the brief.
Right.
They're the ones that have to understand the connection between organizational culture and the spaces that we're designing.
Right.
And if they can understand that and see the great value, whether it's in retaining talent or efficiency or sustainability, then I think that we've made a big step forward in helping them understand why they need to hire good designers and keep them or on staff or close at hand for the long haul.
Right, right. Oh, yeah, that's perfect. Right, not teaching them to be designers, but to understand the value of design and the professionals who practice design. What about, you mentioned a couple things, Martha, that I want to make sure we touch on. Under the realm of social justice and humanity, how can we as a profession, and what's the role of education, how can we as a profession better address the need for diversity in our profession? I'm going to talk about diversity first and then sustainability so that you're teed up for that second half. But let's talk about diversity within our profession, and how can you as an educator in institutions like yours, organizations like IIDA, how can we better address diversity in our profession?
Yeah, I think, Cheryl, there's two ways to look at diversity. It's sort of two paths. One is the responsibility of the institution to make sure that their message and how they attract students is one of diversity, that all are welcome. We need to have scholarships. We need to have programs that are constantly giving the message that diversity is a value of our institutions. In the case of IE, we have diversity in terms of nationalities. We have over 100 nationalities represented. We use English as our teaching language, but we all have accents and we all love those accents no matter what they are. We learn a lot from each other, but we do have programs, and we do have campaigns to tell women that they're especially welcome. We're working with embassies, especially, and ministries, especially on the African continent, to establish scholarships. We have our offices that help with visas, so it makes it very easy for people who do want to come to study, no matter what country they're from. Yeah. So that's one way. Yeah. The other way is what we teach. And I think now it's really interesting, because if I can bring it back to COVID and a lesson from COVID. COVID taught us that each individual is important, that we could all be susceptible to the pandemic, that we all had needs. And I think it put the emphasis on one hand on the individual, as well as our healthcare systems, our cities, our neighborhoods, etc. So I think when we're teaching, and the subject matter that we're teaching has to recognize that within groups, there are always individuals, and we have to be able to respond to those individuals. So we can't say minorities or women or elderly or the infirmed. We have to realize that there may be conditions that bring us together we should be sensitive to, but we also have to remember that in our spaces that we're designing, there may be big differences based on the individual's condition, understanding, desires, wants, experience, lifestyle, etc. So I think what we teach has to be, it can't any longer be sort of the history of Western white male design architecture. And when we look at contemporary problems, we have to understand the sociology, but also understand the individual and the psychology.
Mhm, mhm. And that's ever present as part of a designer's life, is looking from the micro to the macro. It's looking holistically at a place, a person, or a space, or the history, or the context. It is, you know, attentiveness to equity seems that it is most natural for the design profession to embrace. And we certainly are seeing strides being made in access, in visibility, and but the work never ends. And
It
so
never ends.
absolutely appreciate the work that you're doing at your institution and with your students. Let's talk about sustainability. How in the context of the curriculum at your program, how is sustainability addressed?
Yeah, sustainability is something that we try to integrate into every subject. It's also one of the criteria in any project-based learning. We have a new diploma in strategic interior design. It's for working people because it's part of that lifelong learning commitment. And there are lots of projects. They go from smaller to larger. But part of the criteria in evaluating is how sustainability has been approached. Now, sustainability has many, many components, and depending on the situation and the interest of the student, it can be approached from the point of view of sustainability in terms of wellness and the user's experience, health and well-being. It can be approached in terms of energy, in terms of our carbon footprint in the materials we use, and the longevity of a project over time, its flexibility. And it can be approached in terms of how it relates, or how the space is used beyond its original purpose, how it can be used 24 hours a day. Because we know that sustainable spaces are ones that have intensive use. And what we're seeing is if an office is empty, or 70% of an office is empty all the time, it's not sustainable. So if we have an office and we use the space well, but then after hours, maybe it can be a gathering place, a cultural club, a music rehearsal facility. It could be anything. So sustainability has lots of components, and we try to encourage students to probe the different facets and always incorporate it in everything they do.
Yeah. Martha, in relocating from the US to Spain, are you seeing a difference in attitudes around space, adaptive space, regenerative space, right? Different parts of the world. We live in a very large footprint in the US, and different cultures regard space a little differently than we perhaps do in the US. Are you seeing some shifts in attitude around how we use space based on kind of your location now, and the multitude of global students that you're seeing and working with, and professionals as well, the regard for space? What are you seeing? Where are you seeing some differences?
That's a super question, because we do have a very international group of students, and therefore that means that they gather in different ways, and they probably need more kitchens than other people because they like to share their experience through food. But I would say one thing is, because we are in Spain, and the climate is rather benign, the city is very safe. We see that space, perhaps interior spaces, could be a little bit smaller here, because people enjoy being on the street.
Mm.
And with COVID, we have a lot more terraces on the street, places where people gather for a meal or a drink. So in that sense, I would say that probably the biggest difference is how we use our public space. We don't have the big division between private space and public space as in the US.
Yeah.
It's a cultural thing. And I would say probably it's very similar when we talk about offices or hotels or conference spaces, things like that. I would say we're probably quite similar. The open office plan doesn't meet every need. We're finding that people need places where they can personalize that space, where they can feel that they belong, where they have control over the space. And I would assume that this is probably true across the board,
Yeah.
that big open spaces where you're free to go anywhere means that maybe you don't want to be anywhere. So, but
Yeah.
you can tell me more about that, Cheryl, because I'm sure you're looking at it constantly.
Well, that idea around community space and how we use community space, the emphasis on outdoor space, obviously, right, in Europe, that emphasis on the places where we gather, plazas, piazzas, the places where people kind of gather at lunchtime or after 5 o'clock. And I think obviously in the US, from an urban standpoint, we are, I think because of COVID, seeing more emphasis on the outdoor landscape, parks, public areas, even people, working more outside, walking meetings that are happening here in Chicago along the Riverwalk. You see a lot more people having those kinds of interactions. And you've got a background in urban planning and urban affairs. And what's been interesting is this shift in thinking about an interior space as monolithic, because I'm seeing more designers focus on that interior space as being part of a building, and that building being part of a neighborhood, and that neighborhood being part of a city. And so, thinking about an interior space in the context of a larger whole and what that means to an entire city or to a neighborhood. And I'm listening to a lot of younger designers talk about those connections, maybe a lot more than perhaps we did in the past.
I think that's a general trend across the board, which is more not only multidisciplinary looks at spaces, design, buildings, the city, but I think we want to break down some of the silos. We've realized that specialization doesn't always solve the problem. It could solve one, but it could create three more. And so this connection, although we spend such a huge percentage of our time indoors, the indoors is connected to the lobby of a building, the image of the building as well, the space around it, and where that is located in a city. And all of that contributes to how we feel about the interior space. If it's a really uncomfortable, horrible way to get there, then we're not so objective, and we may demand more from that interior space. So it seems to me if we can break down the barriers, as you mentioned, and see it as a continuum, not only will our interior spaces have more quality and be more useful and more welcoming, but they'll have more strength because they'll be more connected to the broader environment.
And it's such a natural extension, right, Martha? And thinking about how those places connect to larger places, it's how we think about our profession connecting to, right? It's the multidisciplinariness of place and process and people, how we as a profession connect to other professions. And so that barrier-free, less siloed look at design and architecture and how we connect to the larger whole.
Absolutely. And Cheryl, I'm sure you know as I do that we can't all be experts in everything.
Right.
And so it's good to form those networks to understand the relationship with other disciplines and other professions, because it's only going to make our profession and help our students be better designers, and be able to respond to the challenges of today.
Yeah. Martha, what are you excited about? What are you optimistic about, personally, professionally, within the realm of design? What's making you smile these days?
Oh goodness, I think those of us who are in design, education, architecture, we're it's kind of silly, but we're eternal optimists. I am super worried about global warming. I'm really worried about many things related to global warming, creating a huge division in our societies, in a really unfortunate and perplexing and dangerous way. On the other hand, I do see that young people are more and more committed to an understanding, to searching for knowledge and implementing it, taking action.
Mhm.
And I think that this feeling of solidarity is something that gives me lots of enthusiasm in terms of students. I also think in terms of education, we don't have a roadmap about um, regenerative architecture, interiors, design. Yet, as you mentioned, they are professions that are open to new ideas and new ways of doing things. So I'm very optimistic about the research possibilities, not only for those of us in academia, but how we can partner with the public sector, the private sector, to find some of those guideposts along the roadmap through research, creating new knowledge. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm also moderately excited that we may learn something from COVID. Um,
I love how you
it's
said that. I love how you said that. We're moderately excited.
moderately, it's so, we just want to go back and have everything the way it was. Well, you can never go back. You always have to go forward. But going forward, learning the lessons about the importance of the individual, but the importance of our systems, the importance of the neighborhood, and seeing the connections between things such as health and space, um, and and a lot of the connections that we learned in the moments of COVID, appreciating professionals in different fields. If we can interiorize those lessons, then I'm pretty optimistic about that too.
Yeah. Um, as we all have said, the pandemic was revelatory in so many ways about so many things, but particularly, as we talked about earlier, around social justice and equity and diversity and inclusion, but also about self-care, emotional well-being. How is that conversation brought forward with your students or in the context of your curriculum?
Yeah, I think that's one of the subjects that's pending to go deeper into it.
Okay.
We do talk about wellness and space. We
Right.
talk about it in terms of connections with other people, fostering backdrops and spaces that encourage certain behaviors. We know that we can't demand, we can't force behavior, but we do know that space can provide the right environment to enhance certain behaviors and to encourage them. But I do think there still is more research needed. We know that women more than men suffered during COVID, but it's hard to know exactly what are the reasons and what would be the remedies for that. I think also depending on the context. Again, we're fortunate in Europe to have many systems of public health
Mhm.
that have taken very good care of people. But I think in the US, the taking care of people has a different slant to it in terms of healthcare. So I think in that sense, I'm we don't have a subject that's called wellness and emotional
Okay.
health. But if you know an expert, if you're our expert, Cheryl, we're going to invite you to talk about that to the students in our diploma course, because it's super important. It's
Well,
really
it just begs of us to think about the places that we inhabit. How do they contribute to or diminish our overall health and well-being? And they're the physiological aspects of health, right? We talk about material transparency, thinking about the components in all of the things that surround us. But how do the spaces themselves, are they comforting? Are they nurturing? Do they increase or decrease psychological safety? I think, that is a realm that is continuing to be explored. But, again, and we are for all the right reasons, putting these burdens, and I'm saying that in a positive way, putting these burdens and expectations on the places that we inhabit to support who we are as human beings. I think that is such an area that is so ripe for conversation and discussion and building curriculum around that. And not that designers can diagnose all of the ills, but space can be prescriptive for supporting health and well-being.
absolutely. I think, as you say, there are so many issues. It comes from lighting, from daylight, from being able to see natural environments, to the colors, the materials, something as direct as the off-gassing of materials on one hand, to something much more emotional, which is how do we react to certain colors, the sunlight at different times of day, can we open windows or not, things like that. It's hard to codify all of that because it depends on the use of the space, it depends on the culture. But again, it goes right back to the very beginning and the first question: how do we get to the why? And I think this is one of those examples. Why should we care, and what does this mean for the health and well-being of the people who inhabit our spaces?
Yeah. I have a personal why for you to ask you.
Yeah.
So you were the executive director of the Pritzker Prize. You were also a curator at the Art Institute in Chicago. And then this move to the academy, to academia, to instructing and teaching. What was the why? Why did you make that move in your career path and in your life?
Well, Cheryl, it was a pretty natural move, because I think that museums are educational institutions, and curating is constructing a narrative with certain elements, whether they're part of the permanent collection or temporary exhibitions. You're creating a narrative that you hope is meaningful and memorable to people. You hope it changes them in some way. And when I moved back to Spain, I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do. And it was one of those serendipitous situations of the creation of IE University due to the Bologna agreements. And we connected, and I saw this is a place where education really means something. It's a transformative endeavor. The institution is always undergoing transformation. We hope the students are undergoing transformation as well. And so it seemed to be the right place to do a different type of education. But again, it's curating all that information that's out there. It's forming networks with experts like yourself to be able to bring that to students. And then it's to be a catalyst so that they can then go on and hopefully not only have a memorable experience at the university, but go on and further their careers teaching, learning throughout their life cycles.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I have, now I'm going to ask you for some advice, some insight, some wisdom. First, for students, for anyone who is studying design right now or who wants to study design right now, what advice do you have for them?
I would say if you want to study design, do not hesitate. Do it. It is probably the most fulfilling, exciting, challenging, interesting discipline that you could be involved in. There will be a demand for more and more designers of many different types in the future, for a number of reasons. And I think that design is one of those professions that keeps on giving. You can use the skills you learn in design in your personal life. You can use them in any job that you take, because it's based on processes. It's based on putting obstacles or challenges in front of oneself and solving it through projects, working with other people. And so I would say, don't hesitate, jump right in.
Perfect. That's great. And for the designer who maybe is sitting in a studio and it's late at night and they're juggling client demands and maybe a diminishing budget and a bit frustrated because they may be surrounded by maybe some colleagues or coworkers who don't quite understand the value of what they're doing. I'm thinking of, sometimes a typical IADA member is, part of an interior design studio in a large architecture firm. And a number of times people question the why they're doing this. What words of advice and encouragement do you have for those moments when people might be questioning their career in design?
Yeah, I think in that sense, Cheryl, we see that we see now more than ever that interior design and the interior spaces we inhabit affect, from the individual, as we were talking about, health and well-being. It has to do with not only how we relate to people in our families, in our workspace, in tourism, but those interior spaces are also, it's really the lifeblood of a city, our buildings. And I know that design is really frustrating and it's not easy for clients or the general public sometimes to understand the value. But if we spend 90% of our time inside, I mean, it just seems so obvious to me that those places where we are have to be responsive and healthy, sustainable. They're the building blocks of who we are and where we live. And so it is frustrating at sometimes, but I think that's another thing, the resilience of designers to try to know what they do is very, very important. And then to try to convince clients they're not just the tool in the hand of a client, but they are people who have the ability to imagine something that hasn't been. We're not repeating, we're not just pulling out, as a lawyer may look at precedents in legal systems. Designers are really imagining a new future, and that is so inspiring to me. So
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. I think that that's perfect and wonderful for sometimes when we need those extra words of encouragement, to remember that designers matter, that they're relevant, and they see the world as it can be and as it should be, and see a future, and help us all see a future that can be realized through design. So Martha Thorne, eternal optimist, extraordinary educator, knowledge seeker, knowledge giver, world traveler, but an educator at heart. So thank you for all that you are doing for the profession, for all that you're doing for current designers and future designers. And thank you for joining me for this conversation.
So the only word you didn't put in that definition, and very important, and friend.
And friend,
that's what,
absolutely.
So such a pleasure to see you, Cheryl. I can't wait till we're together again.
Same.
Thank you so
much.
much.
Safe travels, Martha. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.